Hello everyone, my name is Dina Atta. I'm working as a petroleum engineer at Khalda Petroleum Company. I will be your moderator today for the session. I want to welcome all of you and Dr. Ahmed Mahmoud, who will be our presenter today. Let me introduce him to you. Dr. Ahmed Mahmoud holds a PhD degree in petroleum engineering from Imperial College London and a master's degree from Harriet University in reservoir engineering and bachelor's degree from Cairo University. Dr. Ahmed was a researcher at the Royal School of Mines in Imperial College London, and he is currently an assistant professor of petroleum engineering at the Petroleum Engineering Department at the American University in Cairo. He has more than 20 years of diversified international experience and held a variety of technical positions in production and petroleum engineering. He is recognized as an expert in tight gas sandstone reservoirs, in post-reservoir modeling, and production enhancement artificial lift. He has led several mega-sized gas field projects at international level in Europe, Africa, and Middle East. He has 18 international publications, several industry-funded research grants. He has been on numerous SPE committees. We will have an amazing session today. I wish all of you to enjoy it. So now, Dr. Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks Dina for the introduction. Well appreciated, and I welcome you all, whoever is attending and whoever will watch later on to this session about introduction to artificial lift methods. Okay, we'll keep it very simple and very focused for this initial webinar. And basically, this is what we're going to be going through today in the next 35 to 40 minutes. First of all, to review the introduction of artificial lift methods, we will review the basic production system. And it's very important for anybody working in artificial lift to be able to be aware of the basic production system. So even though most of you or some of you may know it, I will review the system very briefly in the beginning. Secondly, I will review the basic production system evaluation again very briefly, and then we will step into actually the production enhancement criteria selection that will finally lead us to be able to confirm that we have a confirmed case which can be treated by an artificial lift method. Okay, and then the most important part, which we will discuss today, is the basic artificial lift concept. And this is the actual meat I'll be passing to you today, the actual understanding of the artificial lift concept, okay? And it's a very important part, and I will stress on it in detail for the actual concept of the artificial lift. And then we will review the basic artificial lift methods, and I'll only review 5 today, the 5 main ones that are very well used worldwide. And at the very end, we will go over the selection criteria, which will enable you to select the best method you need that will satisfy your previous production evaluation criteria and your actual well or field solution. Okay, so we'll take it step by step, easy, and simple as it can be. And first of all, we will start by reviewing the basic production system, which I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, know. But first of all, let's identify what is an artificial lift. Okay, so artificial lift is a very important aspect of the production engineering sector in the entire oil field. And to make it very simple and clear, okay, we need to identify what is the meaning of artificial lift. And we will stick to this, okay, definition for artificial lift. It's basically a method used to extract petroleum from reservoir, okay, using a man-made method. And the reason we do that is typically in cases where wells are not flowing naturally. So we will now review the entire definition as basically a method used to extract petroleum from reservoirs using man-made methods, okay, typically used on wells that do not flow naturally. Obviously, if the well flows naturally, then there is no need to interfere with an artificial lift method. However, if you have a well and you have confirmed data or results, meaning whether it is seismic data, geophysical data, or petrophysical data that confirms that you do have hydrocarbons in place, and after drilling the well is not flowing naturally, and you confirm that the petrophysics and seismic confirms the existence, and in some cases during the DST you confirm the existence of hydrocarbon in the reservoir, then the only way to be able to retract and get the well to flow is to add an artificial lift method, which is basically a helping hand for the reservoir to be able to deliver petroleum products, hydrocarbons to surface. Okay, so now let's see where the artificial lift systems or methods, okay, are valued within the oil field industry as a whole. So artificial lift methods is basically what I call the oil field survivor. Okay, it has survived over so many years. Okay, and throughout so many cycles. And the reason it survives throughout so many cycles of the oil field ever since the beginning of the century, and furthermore, the reason that it will always be there, okay, is very simple and clear. It is needed in all times, okay? At the time when we have a down cycle, okay, then in that case, the operators will typically go and start using artificial lift systems in brownfields. Because as the oil field is going into the down cycle, okay, the cost of going into exploration fields is very expensive. So in order to be able to maintain the oil production, most operators or oil companies will automatically revert to the brown fields or what we call the mature fields. The old wells that have been drilled so many years back at an optimum cost. And within these wells, okay, they will apply artificial lift methods, okay, to be able to increase their production. Okay. Now, when the industry goes into the upturn cycle, okay, automatically operators, okay, will start, okay, going into the exploration phase. And in the exploration phase, okay, there is still enough economical justification to apply artificial lift methods simply because at that time the oil price is high. And because the oil price is high, they want to again maximize production. And by maximizing production, okay, during the in the exploration fields, okay, that has been justified due to the increase in oil price, okay, they need to maximize production again, and again they will need to use artificial lift methods. So if you're planning to continue your career as a production engineer, artificial lift methods or artificial lift as a production engineer, basically you don't need to worry, okay? You'll always be in business in the down cycle and in the up cycle. However, if we take some more in-depth analysis of how much need there is actually is for artificial lift systems in the future, we will see that we are actually growing at a rate of 5.3% within every 7 to 10 years. And the reason for that is because more and more as the industry starts to diverse into whether deep water or offshore or back now, as we are in back into more onshore operations, again, more and more demand is always going to be there for artificial lift methods, whether it's in the brownfields or when the next upturn comes in, okay, to increase production. And basically, if you look at this curve, we are moving up, or the demand or the need for artificial lift methods will always be there and will always be taking the upturn, okay, in terms of the actual oil field demand. Okay, so now let's take another part a little bit more in depth and review the typical production system of a simple oil well. So, in a simple oil well, as you all know, and I'm sure you have all gone through the typical production system, but I'll go through over it very, very briefly. We have a reservoir which we have confirmed reserves in. We know that the oil is there. Okay, and then the next thing, the oil will go into the wellbore. And in this movement from the reservoir to the wellbore, we encounter quite a big change in delta P. So we lose quite a lot of pressure as we cross the main bridge between the reservoir and into the wellbore. And then it starts moving north. And this is very important because we're moving north. Okay, so we're moving against the will of gravity. So Newton's law does not apply here because Newton's law of gravity, basically things move from north to south. They fall. What we're doing here in production engineering and in the production uh, system in the oil field is basically we are actually mobilizing things from south to north against the force of gravity. And to do that, we need to motivate the fluid. We need to initiate the fluid to move from south to north. And to do that, we use the main criteria of movement that will motivate the fluid to move of delta P. So there's a delta P from here to here. And then there's another delta P as it crosses into the entire trip into the tubing. And then there's going to be a delta P in the wellhead. And then it will encounter another delta P in the choke. And then go into another delta P in the separator. And finally, all its way to the final storage tank, which we call stock tank, which may very well be in some cases at atmospheric pressure. So the reservoir pressure is typically the highest point in the system. And then as you cross this bridge into the wellbore, you pay quite a big amount of delta P, but the flow will move from high reservoir pressure to low reservoir pressure in the wellbore. And then this pressure in the wellbore will be motivated to move to the wellhead because the wellhead pressure is going to be adjusted to be lower than the actual wellbore pressure. And then from the wellhead, okay, the wellhead pressure will be higher than the pressure you have in the separator. And then the separator will have a higher pressure than you have in the stock tank. And this cycle of different delta P's is what actually motivates fluids to flow. So let's take it step by step. Again, very clearly and very slowly, one by one. At the reservoir pressure, where I'm here, the reservoir is at its initial condition, or may not be at its initial condition, but this is the highest pressure point I have in the system. And then I'm going to move into the wellbore where the pressure has now gone lower. But still, I am positively moving in this direction. After that, I'm going to make my way into the tubing, and to make my way into the tubing, I'm actually motivated, I'm actually driven by the high pressure which is in the wellbore. And then finally, I will reach the wellhead pressure destination, and the wellhead pressure destination will be lower than still what you have in front of the perforations or in front of the wellbore. Now, my next trip is going to be to the separator, and because the separator pressure you can adjust to be lower than the wellhead, obviously the flow will come from the wellhead into the separator, and then finally the separator pressure will definitely be higher than the stock tank, and the entire loop takes place, and the whole thing is initiated by one piece of magic called delta P. Okay. Now, in addition to delta P, if you want to go a little bit more into the mathematics of it or into the detailed physics of it, it's delta P and actually a change of ID as well. But the main motivator for flow from south to north in the oil field production system is basically delta P. Okay, so that takes care of the basic production system. And now let's go a little bit in detail into the review of the basic production system evaluation. How am I going to evaluate the system? Okay, and basically the way we evaluate the production system is the normal tool, which I'm sure most of you have heard of, which is called the IPR curve. And the IPR curve stands, as mentioned here in the slide, the inflow performance relationship. And it's a curve which we draw, and it's basically a diagnostic tool which petroleum engineers, production engineers use to be able to diagnose wells and actually know how wells are flowing. Are they flowing at their maximum capacity? Are they not at their maximum capacity? And it is this tool, this diagnostic tool, which we use similar to what doctors do in the medical domain. Okay, they check your blood pressure, they can check some other tests they can do. It's a health check. And in petroleum engineering and specifically in production engineering, we use the IPR curve as the diagnostic tool that will tell me if the well is flowing well, not flowing well, if there are improvements I can do to production, or if currently this is the best condition for the well. So let's see how we use this diagnostic tool, the IPR curve. First, we will go into what the IPR curve looks like. And this is basically it. You have the red curve here called the inflow, and the black curve is called the outflow. And everyone has a specific list of things that's affected. So if we go into the inflow, okay, the inflow is actually referring to anything that's coming in from the reservoir across what I previously mentioned as the first bridge. Okay, so anything coming in from the reservoir into the wellbore. So it's affected by productivity, by permeability, by reservoir pressure and skin damage. And the outflow curve here is basically affected by the rest of the trip which I'm making across the tubing and into the horizontal part on the surface of the production system. So it will be affected by tubing size, water cut, GUR, size of the subsurface safety valve, the choke size, and the wellhead back pressure. Okay, we'll take it again step by step with the IPR curve. So to draw the IPR curve, first I draw the inflow. And in the inflow, the highest pressure I have is the reservoir pressure, which in some cases is called the static well pressure. And if I draw the curve, automatically I will go down because the reservoir pressure is the highest point in the system and it keeps on reducing up until I reach the surface system at the stock tank. And this is basically what is coming in from the reservoir. And then I'm getting flow, so now I can be able to actually calculate the Q from this curve, from the IPR curve, at high rates and at low rates. So initially when I'm very close to the reservoir pressure, I'll be able to get Q, and as the pressure goes down inside the wellbore, I can still calculate Q. Okay, so that's good. Now, the next thing is how do I get the IPR curve to be actually representing the entire system? So after I have induced a packet in tubing inside the well, my inflow part is now going to start passing the ball to the outflow. And the outflow curve is actually a representation of the path. Okay, the path the oil will take from in front of the wellbore all the way up to the surface. Okay, and again, the same thing is applicable. I can be actually monitoring, okay, my Q in relation to my outflow. And at any point, I know my wellbore pressure, my pressure at sand face or inside the wellbore, I can then from the outflow identify my Q. Okay, so we have inflow and we have outflow, and when we put them together, the point of intersection is the magical point, which is called the solution point. And I need them to intersect. If they intersect, we're in business. Okay, they have to intersect. And if they intersect, then they will give me a Q, which means that this well is flowing. This well does not need aid. This well is flowing by itself. Okay. Now, in some cases, they will not intersect. And this is where artificial lift starts to come in. Because I need them to intersect, and then I need to know this delta P, which is causing a non-intersection, and I will identify this delta P, and then I know what sort of artificial lift system I need to add to compensate for this delta P. And once I'm able to compensate this delta P, then I will get my outflow and my inflow to intersect. I will get a solution point. I will get flow. Okay? So now, how do I identify that still artificial lift is the actual solution that will get my points to flow? Now, if my inflow and my outflow are not intersecting, there are several things we can do. It's not just artificial lift. So primarily, I can change, okay, and make an intersection by increasing or pushing my inflow up. And to do that, I can do water injection, I can do gas injection, or I can do WAG, which is water alternating gas. And these projects are typically projects that are working on increasing the pressure inside the reservoir. But these projects are typically very expensive projects. So to have a water injection set up at any field, the field needs to be relatively big. And water injection facilities are really expensive, and gas lift injection is, meaning gas lift injection inside the reservoir is also expensive. And even if you're going to do WAG, water alternating gas, it's even more expensive. So these projects of actually increasing your reservoir pressure, they are applicable, but the justification for the economics, the justification for the size of the field is typically very high. And there's another way I can do by actually getting an intersection if I don't have the economics of doing actual injection, of doing the normal stimulation techniques, which will actually still remove the damage and try to enhance the flow through the porous medium. And these are basically by doing reperforation, by doing acid or fat. And if I do any of these, basically I'm moving my inflow a little bit up in terms of the inclination to be able to reach an intersection between my inflow and my outflow. And these methods of reservoir stimulation are within economic acceptance to be able to increase production and maintain production. Now, in some cases where the problem is actually related to your outflow and you want to get a solution point by moving your outflow curve to intersect the inflow, in that case, there are still several things you can do by modifying the viscosity, increasing the tubing size, but the typically known method is by using artificial lift. And here, artificial lift actually wins economically, because economically, the amount of volume you are going to get by applying an artificial lift method or any of the 5 artificial lift methods, which we will discuss in a few minutes, okay, they are typically very economical to be applied either on single well solutions, multiple well solutions, or entire field solutions. Okay, and this is what makes artificial lift the oil field survivor, or it's applicable for single well, big fields, small fields, and you have a method that will fit for every sort of problem you can have, okay, that is related to wells not flowing naturally. And you can make your solution to be able to fit with different wells with different criteria in the same field and in the same reservoir. Okay, so the most important thing in artificial lift, or the meat of this webinar or this lecture I want to pass to you all, and I want to make sure that everybody's clear with, is the actual artificial lift concept. And this is a very important part for petroleum engineers and production engineers in particular, to know the concept of artificial lift. If you understand the concept of artificial lift, everything else is going to be a piece of cake. because all the five systems follow the same concept. Okay, all the systems are related to the same concept internally, but they have different ways of applying the same concept. So what's the concept? It's basically the concept of momentum. Okay, all of the systems which we discussed today are basically working on the concept of magnification of a small force. So I apply a small force or small energy, and in return, I get something big. I get something more. Okay? And I must get something for free. All right? So artificial lift methods, this is where 1 plus 1 does not equal 2, and it cannot be equal to. Because if 1 plus 1 equals 2, what profit are you making by applying an artificial lift system? Where is the increase in energy conservation? Okay, so for any artificial lift system, for any artificial lift method, 1 plus 1 cannot equal 2. It has to be more than 2, okay, for it to be applicable. And the way this concept is applied is by the application of momentum. Okay, now if we review the main quote, which was said by Archimedes, okay, back in 212 BC. Okay, so Archimedes said, give me a big enough lever and I can move the world. And Archimedes discovered that with levers, he can actually be moving things he cannot move normally by his hand. He can be using it to shift things from one place to the other. And ever since Archimedes came up with this quote or with this concept, okay, the entire world started moving things that are much bigger than human size and human capacity in terms of movement, and the world moved on. And this concept of momentum or of a lever, okay, actually can start doing magical things, okay? So if we take the first example of a class 1 lever, okay, a small child can be actually lifting a big adult simply because he is applying his force at a distance away from the lever. And when he applies this force at a distance away from the lever, the small child can actually be lifting the big adult. And if you change the fulcrum point, okay, and you apply the weight in a different direction, then you can actually be moving something even bigger, okay, with something much smaller. And they take different sorts. There's a class 1, there's a class 2, and there's a class 3, but they're all based on the momentum concept. Applying a small force on one side, and this small force on one side will magnify the force you are applying. And in this case, you are winning because you are getting multiples of the energy, multiples of the force you are applying. And this multiplication of the force you are applying is going to be able to lift, it's going to be able to help, it's going to be able to mobilize and give you more energy in the output than your input. Okay, so if you have digested the basic concept, the concept of the artificial lift system as a momentum-driven systems, all the systems which we will review in the next couple of slides are based on that, but with different colors. Okay, so there's Sakarot, the what is called beam pumping in some cases. Okay, this is based on a momentum system. Hydraulic jet pumping, again, it's another momentum system. The progressive cavity pumping, momentum system. The ESP, momentum system. Gas lift, even momentum system. And all of them, in all of them, the actual concept of artificial lift method is that I apply a small force and I get something big in return. So let's take them one by one. We'll review them here in the very introductory webinar slowly, okay? And I'll show you the actual inside story of every one of these 5 systems and how the inside of them is based on the momentum system. So let's start with Sakarot, okay? So first of all, Saccharod is the most widely used system worldwide. Everybody loves it for a lot of reasons. Okay? In North America, it's very well applied. Okay? It represents about 57% of the complete artificial lift methods in North America. If you take worldwide and you include Russia and China, okay, within the calculation, it still represents 71%. Everybody loves Saccharod. Okay? It's very cheap, it's very economical, it's very easy to maintain, it's very durable, lives for a very long time, and it works in most locations and with a very wide range of wells in terms of reservoir pressure, in terms of production. Okay, so the wide range, the low cost, the easy maintenance, okay, all of this makes Saccharod the favorite artificial lift system everybody thinks of. Okay, so what is the inside story of the Saccharod system? Again, it is momentum. Okay, it's a very clear momentum. Okay, so here I have a lever, and by applying a force on one side, I magnify the force on the other side. That's the first momentum system, lever system. And then there's a second lever momentum system here. I can change the position of the pitman here in relation to the crankshaft. And by changing this, I can be actually increasing the momentum system, so I can actually be putting much less power or electrical consumption by the electric motor if it's electrically driven. Okay, and this very small power will be magnified once here in the crankshaft, and then I magnify it again, okay, in the second lever system, okay, with the use of the walking beam, and then I finally get a double magnified force, a double magnified power, and a double ability to lift more force from the downhole. Okay, so what does it look like downhole? Downhole is very simple. One valve is called the standing valve, and this is static, it doesn't move, and one valve is called the traveling valve. On your way up, as you're pulling the Saccharods up, okay, the standing valve will be open. It's like a ball on a seat in a check valve concept. And the ball here will be seated on a seat. Okay, so it's closed. And this gives you the ability to actually be taking fluid from the reservoir. It's a suction process. And then on your way down, okay, the ball will sit on its seat and prevent fluid from going inside the reservoir, while the ball here will be unseated to enable the actual traveling valve to go in and reach the top of the standing valve. So it's a very small, let's say, piston sort of concept. And this piston concept, okay, applies the concept of suction mechanism from the reservoir. And in this suction mechanism, you will get the reservoir fluid to come in and move all the way up. And typically, the good thing about it is that if you review the pressures, similar to the pressures we reviewed in the initial slides of this webinar, from the reservoir pressure it goes down to the wellbore pressure, and then there's a small amount of pressure or distance which maybe the well will be able to deliver, but it's not enough to deliver to surface. So this suction process, which we apply with the momentum process, which we applied on surface, okay, will actually give you a magnification, and it will compensate the delta P required to shift the gradient line from the wellbore to the pump intake, and it will shift it in a very nice way. It will give you a plus in terms of a boost in delta P, let's say, and then from there on, you will be able to have enough gradient to be able to deliver the fluid to the wellbore with positive pressure as well. And typically this wellhead pressure will be enough to take you throughout the rest of the cycle all the way up through the separator and to the stock tank. Okay, so what are the pros and cons before we use Saccharod? As I said before, it's very cheap. Everybody loves Saccharod. All right, very efficient. You can get them very cheap, and it's high efficiency, very durable. Okay, it gives you very strong drawdown and very flexible to be applied in a wide range of field with different reservoir pressures. Now, the cons, okay, or the disadvantages, basically, it's a mechanical system. There's a lot of mechanics into it. There's a lot of movement. The rods are moving up and down, and because of the movement of the rods up and down, and the standing valve moving up and moving down, all of this movement, okay, is mechanical. And because of this mechanical motion, there's typically going to be wear and tear. There's typically going to be things that will might break. Okay, it doesn't really work that well in high gas oil ratios. Okay, and it's depth sensitive. Okay, so it will still work on very high depth, but it will give you a bit less production. But on the overall, Saccharod is one of the heroes of artificial lift gases. Okay, so let's go into the next one, the hydraulic jet pumping method. And the hydraulic jet pumping method, okay, is basically a very small and simple setup, okay? And there's no mechanical moving parts here, okay? You will have a skid on the surface that will have a separator and a motor and a pump. And this motor and pump is going to inject what we call a power fluid. And this power fluid, as it moves downhole, in this magnification of the downhole scenario, okay, it passes through a nozzle and then from a nozzle into a diffuser and a throat. And this throat diffuser is actually going to compensate instead of high pressure, low velocity, it will at the end give you something which is a little bit less pressure but a little bit higher velocity. So now by injecting a power fluid from the surface, it goes down and it mixes with the reservoir fluid. And in this concept of mixing with the reservoir fluid, it will take the reservoir fluid with it, add it to its own power, and move all the way with it to the surface. And then on the surface, I can collect it all in the separator, and I separate the previous fluid I injected from the oil that came out from the reservoir. And basically, it's a power fluid. The concept of the hydraulic jet pumping is a power fluid being pumped through a nozzle. This is the main concept, or hydraulic jet pumping in a nutshell. Okay, so what are the pros and cons of the hydraulic jet pump? Quite a lot of pros, not that many cons. You can lift high viscous fluids, and this is the name of the game in hydraulic jet pumping. The reason the oil in the reservoir is not able to come up is because it's heavy and it's high viscosity. And because it's high viscosity, it's really immobile. It cannot move by itself. And the good thing in hydraulic jet pumping is that you are adding a fluid to it, and this fluid will improve the viscosity and make the fluid now movable. Okay? And another pro is basically easy installation, very easy to install with mast units, with snubbing units. There's no mechanical parts. Okay, so that's another plus. It can work on deviated wells, and if you are tight economically and you don't have enough economics to apply the power fluid in terms of hydraulic oil, you can use water, and this water will be enough to lift and mix with the oil and take the oil all the way up the surface. Even if you have scale and even if you have offshore applications, the hydraulic jet pump is a very economically feasible artificial lift method. The cons, okay, well, not that much. Still, hydraulic jet pumping is one of the most favorite offshore. Okay, low efficiency. Pump cavitation occurs because it's a pumping system, so you need to make sure that there's not a lot of air or gas in. A bit sensitive to back pressure and sensitive to free gas also. And the power oil system, if you need to use power oil system, it might be a bit expensive if you are in a tight economic budget. Okay, so let's go on to the next system, which is the progressive cavity pumping. And it's again very simple. Basically, it's good in terms of it can lift high viscous fluids, and even if you have sand within the production or scales, okay, the progressive cavity pump will still be able to move it because it's based on a spiral concept. And you have a spiral which is rotating, and within this rotation, there's a delta P which is applied, and this delta P will be able to also lift your fluids downhole all the way up the surface. Okay, so it's very simple. The setup of the PCP or the progressive cavity pump is very simple. You have a very simple setup which is applied on the surface, an electric motor, typically much smaller than the electric motor in the sucker rod or in any other system. You connect electricity to it, you start, okay, rotation, and this is where you get a momentum, okay, a lever, okay, it's an expansion of energy. I apply a small energy via a shaft, and then I multiply the amount of energy I apply in the lever by using gear reduction ratios, different gear ratios, and in using this different gear ratios, I have actually multiplied the amount of power I have applied from the electric motor to be able to rotate the spiral rotor, okay, which is installed downhole at a much higher RPM than what my actual electric motor is supplying on surface. And it's basically the rotation between the rotor and the static stator downhole that applies the delta P and gives you the ability to lift the fluids, the high viscous fluids, from the reservoir and wellbore all the way up the surface. So what are the pros and cons? Okay, the pros is basically used for high viscosity. It's one of the best methods used in high viscosity applications. Paraffin and sand can still be handled, easy to regulate, very simple, very easy to install, very easy to repair, and very easy to maintain. Okay, again, one of the most loved artificial lift methods. The cons is basically it's less powerful than other systems. It only delivers low rate and low heads, and we'll see towards the end of this lecture that it actually, even depth-wise, it's not that good. Okay, so let's go to the ESP as an artificial lift system. Okay, and it stands for the electric submersible pump, which is industry language is called the ESP. Now, the ESP is the most expensive, typically the most expensive system. Okay, the range is very wide in terms of price, and because it's a bit expensive, okay, it's still very popular because even though it's an expensive artificial lift system, or typically an expensive artificial lift system, still a lot of people like it. A lot of operators like it. And basically because it gives you big volume, okay? Very big amounts of fluid, okay? And it's the name of the game. Whether you're in an up cycle of the oil field or a down cycle of the oil field, you need more production. And if your target is just maximizing production, you can go for the ESP if economically it is feasible, okay? Because the ESP is a system which is, in terms of cost per volume, it's very efficient. And most of all, it is actually the most efficient system in terms of efficiency of the other artificial lift systems. So the ESP can give you up to 65% efficiency, whereas the previous system, they are typically much less than 50%. Okay, so what's the nutshell of ESP? It's based on a stator rotor, okay, rotation, which applies fluid pumping, and then it moves the fluid all the way to surface. So from the wellbore, okay, there's going to be a motor which is applying a rotation. It's a downhole motor, and the downhole motor is actually getting its electricity from a regulated electricity system via a cable, okay, and then before the rotation and the pump intake takes place, it passes through a pump intake, okay, which is like a separator, and it's a very important part. It needs to separate so that you don't get a lot of gas in, so that you don't want to have cavitation, and because the ESP can only work at its best when there is not a lot of gas being taken in. Because if you take in a lot of gas, then the actual mechanical system can be damaged. And we'll see in the next slide of the difference in performance you can have if you can have a down thrust or an up thrust within these components. The actual ESP from the inside looks something similar to this here, and basically you have multiple stages stacked on top of each other, and inside every stage there is going to be a rotor and a stator which is applying a rotation. And again, the nutshell of the ESP is basically you apply a small amount of electricity from surface, and because you have multiple stages here, the amount of energy which is provided by the motor in terms of rotation of RPM is actually rotating multiple stages, and these multiple stages are all connected together within the same shaft, and the rotation of the same shaft will give you much higher volume of production, which is mobilized all the way up to the surface. Okay, so this is the delta P, and again, the delta P here is pretty high. So typically, if this is reservoir pressure and you're going to be producing from reservoir pressure to inside of the wellbore, the amount of delta P or the total dynamic head, which the ESP is actually compensating for you, is quite big. And the good thing is that it's within your control. You can opt to design ESP to have a lot of stages, so you can have a big total dynamic head. You can reduce the number of stages. Okay, you can do a lot of things, but typically it gives you the luxury of being able to have a very big delta P total dynamic head, and finally be able to have enough gradient to move all the way up to surface with positive pressure on the wellhead. Okay, so if you look at the performance curve of any, okay, I mean, we're taking this as an example of any ESP, you will see that the efficiency is pretty high. Okay, and the efficiency of the ESP in this case is reaching up to 65%, which is very good. Okay, but there is a name to the game here. You have, in order to get the 65% efficiency, you have to be operating the ESP within its recommended range, because it's very sensitive. If you're operating it within what's called the down thrust area, so you're under, okay, operating the pump, then first of all, you're going to get less head, okay, less power, and you're going to have much less efficiency. And the same applies if you're in the up thrust area. Okay, so there is a way to do it, and hopefully there are going to be webinars in the future that will help you actually to design the ESP in an efficient way to make sure that your ESP is always operating within its recommended operating range to be able to deliver the maximum efficiency for any ESP pump system. So what are the pros and cons? The pros, as I mentioned before, what makes everybody loves it, everybody likes it, okay, particularly if you're offshore and you've already done quite a bit of investment to produce hydrocarbons from offshore, is the high volume. The lifting cost and volume efficiency is super, okay? It can give you very high volumes at relatively very high cost compared to the cost of the pump, compared to the electricity you're applying. It can work anywhere, onshore, offshore, and a wide range of sizes. As I mentioned before, you can have a lot of stages, you can have less stages, okay? So it's very flexible. You can tailor make, okay? Now, some cons, okay, but mainly you need electricity. So if you're in a place which is pretty remote, you cannot connect to electricity, so maybe the ESP is not the best for you. Cable complexity, which used to be a problem in the industry previously, because you have to actually be installing the pump and pulling the cable to it. But in more recent modifications, okay, this problem has been overcome pretty much in the industry, and installation is now much smoother. Okay, obviously it's gas problematic, very sensitive to a certain percent of gas. It's expensive, okay, and maybe not that applicable in weak wells. Because in weak wells, maybe you don't have enough economics to justify the ESP. So let's go to another or the last system we'll see today, which is gas lifting. Okay, and gas lifting is another magical tool. The good thing about gas lifting, okay, there's actually double the momentum concept. The first momentum concept is the economical concept, the economical momentum concept in gas lift. So gas lift is actually based on the concept of recycling the gas which is not sellable. So if you have a big field, that's 200, 300 wells, for example, and you have a lot of gas, and obviously not all gas is sellable, and you end up with some gas which have heavy components, okay, and this gas is not sellable at the correct price in the market, okay, then you initiate a gas lift facility, and it's like a recycling of the gas, and you use the gas which nobody has bought, which you cannot sell at an economical market price, and you use it to inject into weak wells. And by injecting into weak wells, you actually reduce the hydrostatics. And by reducing the hydrostatic fluid level, you have actually initiated the delta P to motivate the fluid to move all the way to the wellhead. And the first momentum system in gas lift is the economics of it. So if we're talking at today's price of $40 a barrel, and I think for gas it will be around $4. If oil is $40 a barrel and gas is $4 per unit, then the gas you are actually using to initiate your gas lift system is not going to be worth anything more than $1 in today's prices. And with this $1 unit, you can be actually lifting a barrel which is worth $40. And so this is the first momentum system. Now the second momentum system is that gas lift is actually using the concept of, okay, you are using the gas to lift the oil, and using the gas expansion and the gas delta P, okay, to mobilize the entire fluid column. So that's the second momentum system in gas lift. It typically needs a very big facility. So there's quite very big facilities in Egypt, in Qatar, in India, okay, and some other places in the world. But within the Middle East, these are the three main places that have big gas facilities. You need to have a big field, about 200 to 300 wells, to be able to have enough gas to pump and motivate the decline of pressure to mobilize a much higher fluid column. And if we take this as a gas of completion well, where this is a non-gas of completion well, basically you pump gas in the annulus, and when you start pumping gas in the annulus, this is the magnification of the actual gas lift. It starts opening the valve, it injects gas, which reduces the hydrostatic column, and then the second one starts to reduce the hydrostatic column, and then the very last one will stay open all the time and continue to reduce the hydrostatic column, which will lift the fluid, and you have a much bigger drawdown delta P, so it actually motivating more fluid to come in from the reservoir to the well. Okay, so some pros and cons, but this is basically once you have initiated the gas lift system and you have positive pressure at the surface, then the gas lift system is working well. And the main pros is that you can handle solids, large volumes, even in gassy wells. It can work very easy to repair. Stick line repairable, can work onshore or offshore. The cons are basically, well, you have to have a field that has enough gas. So if your field doesn't have enough gas lift cannot be applicable. Typically used in large fields, and it can also, it might not be that good in terms of viscous fluids. Okay, so that's the basic. We have now reviewed all the 5 systems. I wanted to review with you the main 5 basic systems are used worldwide. We know the concept of gas lift is basically the momentum system, and we reviewed the secrets or the actual momentum system in every one of the 5 methods. So now let's go briefly into the selection criteria. And within the 5 systems we have, how do you know which is best? Some of them overlap. Some of them are good in terms of volume, but expensive. Some of them are the opposite. Some of them are good for viscous fluids. Some of them are not good for viscous fluids. How can you decide? Okay, particularly that typically artificial lift is economically based because initially to start an artificial lift method, you are in a marginal fee. So we take it step by step. First of all, there's an initial screening criteria. And there's the initial screening criteria can be related to depth. How deep is your well? And what volume do you need from the well? So in Gaza, for example, Gaza can be working to wells up to 16,000 feet. Pretty much pretty deep wells. And it can give you up to 30,000 barrels a day. The ESP is the same. It can give you up to 30,000 barrels a day, and it can be working up to 16,000 feet in depth. And the hydraulic jet pump, it can lift fluids from as deep as 11,000 feet, and it can give you up to around 24,000 barrels a day. So these are the three systems that are actually, they can work within pretty much deep wells and give you high volume. And then the second one is the low volume methods. And obviously the piston pump here is the hero, okay? It can go down to wells as much as 16,000 feet and give you 4,000 barrels of oil per day. The PCP pump can go up to 6,000 and give you around 3,600 barrels of oil per day. And then the sucker rod up to 3,000 barrels of oil per day at 16,000 feet. So again, the range is wide, okay? So that's the initial screening criteria. So if you know how deep your well is and how much production you want, you can actually be screening and you will eliminate at least two or three of these methods in relation to depth and in relation to volume and more of all the delta P, which you need. Okay, and this is a summary of basically the summary of the medical tool you can be using to go into the selection criteria. The initial technical screening, it's related to delta P. You cannot go around that, okay? You have to know your IPR curve. You have to have drawn your IPR curve. You know your inflow, outflow, you know where they're shooting. Not because there is from this delta P, you will be able to decide which of the artificial lift method is best for you. And then there's a technical comparison, viscosity, the GUR, the characteristics of the reservoir and of the oil or the hydrocarbon it produces, and the efficiency, the location you are in, whether it's onshore or offshore. And then finally, it's the economic efficiency, okay? And the lifting cost, how much money are you going to be paying for how much volume you're going to be getting, okay? I assure you that for all of them, you are going to be gaining because artificial lift method is based on the momentum system, the lever system, but still one of them is going to be better than the other in terms of the lifting cost per volume. So that's what I have for you all today. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you have learned something from me today and it was useful, simple, sweet, and clear. And I'm open to questions. See you in the next hour as well. So, Dina, the floor is yours.
Yes, I'm here, Doctor. Thank you so much for the session. Actually, it was very, very informative. And I'm working for the artificial lift team, my company, in a specific Sakarut team, so it's very beneficial for me. So I have some questions from the audience.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, first one for the outflow curve. Why the pressure decrease at the first at the beginning, and then it decrease in the beginning, and then it increase with increasing the flow rate.
For the outflow curve. So let's go back to the outflow curve. So I think the student or the person asking, let's go quickly back to the is this is the one that is almost like a tick. Okay, so I'll take it to a slide where it just has the outflow curve. Okay. Okay, here we go. This slide is typically the best. So, I think the question is, the student is asking, why does it decline here and then it increases from there on? Okay? All right. So, let's take it step by step. So, initially the fluid is coming from the reservoir into the wellbore. Okay. And we said before that the pressure in the reservoir is high and the pressure in the wellbore is lower, because this is what initiates the flow. But after it is in the wellbore, the outflow curve has nothing to do with the reservoir pressure. Okay, the outflow curve is a representation of the point you are in inside the well. So it starts with, let's say, where the laser is right there. Okay, and then from where the laser point is right there, I'm going to be moving up to a point before I start entering the tubing. And this distance here, this distance I have traveled from in front of the perforations up to the point of entry of the tubing is where we have a constant ID, which is the ID of the casing. It's the casing ID. And you are moving from this depth up to a higher depth. Typically, you will be losing pressure. So, this is where you are in the beginning in front of the perforations, and you're moving up so it goes down. And after that, you enter into the tubing. Now, when you enter into the tubing, you are entering a much smaller ID than the casing ID. And because the ID is smaller than the casing and you have pressure coming in, the pressure will be increasing and not decreasing. Is that clear? Let me make it a bit more. Okay.
Yes, it's very
So
clear.
I tell you how we can. Let me start. Try to pick a pen if it works. Okay. So from this point, this. Okay. All right. Here I am moving across a certain ID, which is casing ID. Casing ID, I'm moving from this point here, this depth here, okay, let's say this X sign, up till before I enter the tubing, and it's delta, okay? The pressure from here up to this point is going to be moving down, and this represents this part here where we're moving down, okay? And then from this point, I can have the luxury to change the color. Yeah, okay. Now, once I enter the tubing, and all the way from here, all the way up to here, this is a much smaller ID, and the pressure coming in here is now going to start increasing because I am reducing the ID, and this represents the part of the curve which is like from here all the way up, moving this way. Okay, does this answer the question?
Okay, it's very, very clear, doctor. Let me go for the second question.
Yes, go ahead.
Does the second road handle the high GOR wells? If it yes, how does the pump mechanics deal with gas locking problems?
Okay, the sucker rod can handle them, but the problem with Gazert is okay. Let me go down to where we have the slide of the standing valve and the traveling valve. Okay. Now the problem with high GOR wells is that there is going to come a time, okay, where these two valves are working like a chamber, okay? And there's going to come a time where in high GOR wells, okay, separation will occur. And obviously the gas will come to the top and the liquid, whether it's oil or water, will separate below. And in this separation, okay, it will add a bit more load and it will cause some sort of rattling, okay, in the mechanical movement of the sucker rod, okay. So you will have to be applying more power and obviously this rattling effect is not good mechanically for the sucker rod. Yes, it will reduce the volume which is coming to surface, but if separation has occurred, but if the gas is already embedded or solution gas or gas which is there's some dissolving of this gas within the oil, it will be actually helping the lifting effect. It is only unless the gas is separated from the oil where the oil will be heavier and it will act as a burden on the sucker rod of the system.
Um, okay. Uh, the third question, which the artificial lift methods play with hydrostatic pressure and which other methods play with the bottom hole pressure?
Okay, well, obviously the system, the most system that plays with the hydrostatic is the gas lift. Okay, because in gas lift, okay, basically it is the system which uses the changes of hydrostatics, okay, to be able to initiate flow. And the gas lift in particular is the one method, okay. If we go here, I hope you can see this, and we pick up the laser. Okay, so gas lift is the main system that works on changing of the hydrostatics because we are injecting gas to reduce the hydrostatic head and be able to lift to surface. Okay, the sucker rod is based on mechanics, the ESP, stator rotor concept, and the same for these two pumps as well.
Um, okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ahmed, for the session. And it's very, very informative. And I want to thank all of our students for being with us today. And thank you for all of you. Have a good day.
Okay, thanks, and I hope to see you all again in the next webinar. Thanks, Dina, and thanks, Dr.